The Arkansas River surged with a wicked purpose, consuming the lands of Willow Creek as Isolde Hearthstone remained rooted on the porch of her family's farmhouse, observing the wagon bearing her parents and younger siblings fade into the far-off landscape. The floodwaters had surged faster than anyone had anticipated, and in the pandemonium of their hurried escape, no one had realized she was not on board. It was May of 1873, and at 18 years old, Isolde had never seen such ruin. The spring rains had been unyielding for weeks, and now the river had burst its banks with a devastating force. Water already licked at the base of their humble home, the current intensifying with each fleeting moment. "Mother! Father!" she cried out, her voice muffled by the flood's roar and the distant growl of thunder. The wagon was now just a tiny dot on the horizon, making its way to the safety of higher ground at Redemption Ridge. Isolde's heart pounded in her chest as she evaluated her circumstances. The horses had been taken with the wagon. The water was rising swiftly, already infiltrating the porch's floorboards. She backed inside, gathering a few belongings, a photograph of her family, her mother's silver locket, and a small leather-bound Bible, and stuffed them into a canvas sack. She ascended to the second floor of the house, hoping someone would notice she was missing and come back for her. Through the window, she watched as the water continued its unyielding ascent, carrying debris from upstream, branches, fence posts, and remnants of other unfortunate homesteads. Night was descending, bringing with it a deep chill. The rain persisted, pounding against the roof, and Isolde wrapped herself in a quilt, holding back tears. She was not one to yield to despair, but the weight of her situation bore down on her. If the water rose much higher, the house itself might not endure the current. As darkness shrouded the valley, Isolde lit a single lantern, placing it in the window as a signal. She hoped someone would see it before the waters consumed her entirely. Far away, Skyclaw Dunwind guided his horse through the muddy paths of Willow Creek. At 25, he had already experienced a lifetime's worth of adventures as a cowhand, scout, and sometimes a bounty hunter. He had been heading back to his small cabin outside of town when he encountered the mass exodus of families fleeing the flood. "The Hearthstone place is likely underwater by now," he overheard someone say, as families huddled under makeshift shelters on the ridge road. "What a pity. The Hearthstones are good people," another voice responded. "At least they made it out in time. I saw them headed up to Redemption Ridge with the others." Skyclaw might have carried on, but something gave him pause. He had met Finn Hearthstone a couple of times, a hard-working man with a kind face. Skyclaw remembered him mentioning his family, including a daughter who was about to become a schoolteacher. Mr. Skyclaw found himself standing before a weary man who was tightly holding a young girl. "Have you accounted for all your family members?" he inquired. Finn Hearthstone's expression turned pale. "Serafina," he called to his wife, who was attending to their younger son. "Where is Isolde?" The truth struck them like a punch to the gut. In the frenzy of their hurried escape, their eldest daughter had been forgotten. "She was collecting her books," Serafina Hearthstone murmured, the horror of the situation becoming clear. "I assumed she was with us in the wagon." "I'll retrieve her," Skyclaw declared, already pivoting towards his horse. "You can't," Finn interjected, gripping his arm. "The water is too high now. The road is impassable. You'll drown trying." Skyclaw met the man's gaze steadily. "I am familiar with these lands more than most. There is a route through the western ridge that might still be accessible. If your daughter is at the house, there is still time." Before anyone could voice further objections, Skyclaw swung himself onto his steed, Thunder, and rode off into the stormy night. The rain lashed against his face as he urged his horse back towards the flood-stricken valley, away from the safety of higher ground. The path was perilous. Twice, Thunder nearly lost his footing on the slick, narrow trail that snaked along the ridge. Lightning tore through the sky, revealing the destruction below. What had once been serene farmland was now a turbulent lake, dotted with the rooftops of submerged structures. Skyclaw's heart grew heavy. If the girl was still down there, her chances of survival were slim, yet something compelled him onward. Perhaps it was the memory of his own sister, lost to a fever years ago when he had been away on cattle drives. He hadn't been there when she needed him most, a regret that still haunted his dreams. Through the sheet of rain, Skyclaw discerned a faint light in the distance, a single glow emanating from the upper floor of a house, partially submerged in the floodwaters. The Hearthstone residence. Isolde jumped at the sound of splashing below. The water had risen to the ceiling of the first floor, and the house creaked under the strain. She gazed out the window, her lantern casting a feeble light into the darkness. A figure on horseback was approaching, skillfully navigating the treacherous waters. Hope swelled within her. "Hello!" she shouted, pushing open the window despite the rain. "I'm here. Up here." The rider looked up, and in a flash of lightning, Isolde glimpsed his face, strong-jawed and intensely focused. She had seen him around town before, a cowboy who kept to himself but was known for his fairness and horsemanship. "Miss Hearthstone!" His deep voice cut through the roar of the water. "Your family sent me. The house is unstable. We need to get you out." "How?" she called back, her voice a mix of fear and relief. The water surrounding the house was at least 6 feet deep and flowing swiftly. "I'm coming to you," he replied, guiding his horse closer to the house. "Prepare to descend. Pack only the essentials." Isolde gathered her modest collection of valuables and cast a final glance around the chamber that had served as her refuge since she was a little girl. She then leaned out the window, observing as the cowboy guided his steed directly beneath her. "You'll need to jump," he shouted up, balancing precariously in his stirrups and extending a hand towards her. "I'll be there to catch you." The gap seemed insurmountable, but the other option was inconceivable. Drawing a deep breath, Isolde hoisted herself onto the windowsill, gripping her bag tightly to her chest. "Have faith in me," the cowboy assured her, his gaze fixed on hers. In that instant, an unspoken vow seemed to pass between them. Isolde shut her eyes and leapt. Powerful arms enveloped her waist, and she found herself pressed against the sturdy frame of her savior. The horse beneath them whinnied anxiously as the torrent swirled around its legs. "Hold on tightly," the cowboy directed, positioning her in front of him on the saddle. His arms wrapped around her as he took the reins, and despite the peril, Isolde felt an odd sense of security. "I am Skyclaw Dunwind," he murmured in her ear as he steered the horse away from the crumbling house. "And we will endure this, Miss Hearthstone. I give you my word." As they embarked on their treacherous voyage through the deluge, Isolde glanced back one last time at her childhood home. With a horrifying creak, the structure started to cave in, succumbing to the relentless water. If Skyclaw had arrived even a few moments later, she would have been doomed. "Thank you," she murmured, though she doubted he could hear her over the tempest. The route Skyclaw selected led them along what had once been the principal thoroughfare, now transformed into a roaring river. Thunder battled bravely against the current, his robust muscles tensing with effort. Skyclaw kept one arm securely around Isolde's waist, his body serving as a barrier against the wind and rain. "There's an elevation ahead," he informed her after they had journeyed for what felt like an eternity. "Once we reach it, we'll be above the flood level." Isolde nodded, too weary and chilled to speak. She had long since lost sensation in her fingers and toes, and her drenched gown clung to her like a funeral shroud. The horse toiled up the slope, its hooves slipping in the mud. Skyclaw dismounted, leading Thunder by the reins while assisting Isolde in the saddle. "We're nearly there," he urged, his voice a beacon in the gloom. When they finally reached the summit, they discovered themselves on a small plateau overlooking the submerged valley. The rain had eased to a light drizzle, and through the gaps in the clouds, stars were beginning to emerge. "We can't reach Redemption Ridge tonight," Skyclaw declared, surveying the horizon. "There's an old cabin about a mile from here. It's not much, but it's dry and has a hearth." Isolde nodded appreciatively. The prospect of warmth and refuge was almost too delightful to imagine. The humble cabin was indeed sparse, featuring a single room with a stone hearth, a thin bed, a wobbly table, and 2 chairs. But to Isolde, it seemed like a sanctuary. Skyclaw assisted her in dismounting, steadying her as her frozen legs gave way. He carried her inside and carefully placed her in one of the chairs. "You need to change out of those damp clothes," he stated plainly, turning to attend to his horse. "I'll take care of Thunder and gather some firewood." There should be some old clothes in the chest by the bed. They won't fit perfectly, but they'll be dry. Before Isolde could reply, he had left, closing the door behind him to grant her privacy. She struggled with the buttons of her gown, her fingers stiff from the cold. The chest contained a man's flannel shirt and a pair of wool pants that were far too large for her slight figure. But Skyclaw had been correct. They were wonderfully dry. By the time he returned with an armful of firewood, Isolde had changed and wrapped herself in a worn blanket from the bed. Her long auburn hair cascaded in damp curls down her back, and her face was pale from exhaustion. Skyclaw worked silently, building a fire with practiced ease. Soon flames danced in the hearth, filling the small room with a warm glow. "You should take the bed," Skyclaw suggested, finally breaking the quiet. "I'll manage on the floor, Mr. Dunnewind," Isolde began, her voice trembling from cold and fear. "I don't know how to express my gratitude for what you've done. You risked your life for a stranger." Skyclaw's expression warmed slightly. "No thanks are needed, Miss Hearthstone. Anyone in their right mind would have done the same. But they didn't," she pointed out. "You did." A faint smile crossed his lips. "Let's just say I know what it feels like to be abandoned." There was a story there, Isolde could sense, but exhaustion was quickly overtaking her. She moved to the bed and lay down, pulling the blanket tightly around herself. "Your family will be beside themselves with worry," Skyclaw said, settling himself on the floor near the fire. "As soon as the sun rises, we'll set out for Redemption Ridge. It should take most of the day, but we'll make it." "Will the waters have subsided by then?" Isolde asked drowsily. "Not completely, but I know a path that should keep us out of the deepest parts." Isolde wanted to ask more, to learn about this quiet man who had appeared like a guardian in the storm. But her eyelids grew too heavy to keep open. The last thing she remembered was the soothing sound of the fire, and the silhouette of Skyclaw Dunwin standing watch in the darkness. She woke to the scent of coffee. Sunlight poured through the lone window of the cabin, and Skyclaw stood at the small stove, stirring something in a pot. "Morning," he said, glancing over his shoulder. "Found some beans and coffee in the supplies. It's not much for breakfast, but it's warm." Isolde sat up, brushing a hand through her disheveled hair. In the daylight, she could finally see her rescuer clearly. Skyclaw Dunawin stood tall and lean, with wide shoulders and skin tanned by the sun. His hair was as dark as the night sky, and his eyes held a vivid green hue that evoked memories of summer pine forests. A scar etched along his jawline, a testament to past struggles, yet it did little to detract from his striking appearance. "Thanks," she murmured, taking the tin cup of coffee he extended to her, "for everything." Skyclaw simply nodded, a man who spoke sparingly. As they consumed their modest meal, Isolde discovered that he had once worked as a cowhand on various ranches across the territory before choosing to settle near Willow Creek 2 years prior. "I take on odd jobs mostly," he clarified. "Breaking in horses, tracking strays, guiding travelers through the passes, and occasionally rescuing ladies in need," Isolde added with a slight smile. A faint blush touched Skyclaw's cheeks. "That's a new addition to my list of services," he admitted. Their gazes met briefly, and an unspoken connection passed between them, a bond they couldn't quite define. Their journey to Redemption Ridge commenced under clear skies, a stark contrast to the tumultuous storm of the previous night. Skyclaw had found an extra pair of boots in the shack, which, though too large for Isolde, were functional when stuffed with rags. She rode behind him on Thunder, her arms loosely wrapped around his waist for support. The landscape bore the marks of the recent flood, uprooted trees, displaced boulders, and thick mud that clung to Thunder's hooves. The valley below remained largely submerged, a vast expanse of water where farms and pastures had once thrived. "Will people be able to return to their homes?" Isolde asked, surveying the destruction. "Some will," Skyclaw responded. "Others will move on. That's the way life is out here. Nature has a way of reminding us who's in control." They halted at midday to rest the horse and eat the jerky Skyclaw had packed in his saddlebags. Perched on a fallen log, Isolde observed as he tended to Thunder, his movements gentle despite his rugged exterior. "Have you always been on your own, Mr. Dunwind?" she inquired. Skyclaw fell silent for so long that Isolde thought he might not respond. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than usual. "I had a family once, parents and a sister. I lost my father to a mining accident when I was 12. Elysia and my sister Lyra kept the farm running while I worked cattle drives to earn money. Then a fever struck while I was away." He paused, his hands stilling on Thunder's flank. "By the time I received the news and returned, I was burying them both." "I'm so sorry," Isolde said, her heart aching for the pain he had endured. Skyclaw shrugged, but the nonchalance of the gesture couldn't conceal the old wound. "It was a long time ago, nearly 8 years now." "Is that why you came back for me? Because of your sister?" His green eyes met hers, surprisingly vulnerable. "Maybe. Or perhaps it's just what good people do for one another out here." They resumed their journey, the terrain becoming steeper as they neared Redemption Ridge. Isolde discovered that Skyclaw had briefly served in the war before abandoning his post. Not out of fear, he clarified, but because he couldn't justify fighting men from the north when his own kin resided in Pennsylvania. "Some label me a coward for it," he stated, devoid of resentment. "But I answer to my own moral compass, not theirs. I believe it requires more bravery to follow one's heart than to obey orders one deems unjust," Isolde countered. Skyclaw looked back at her, his eyes reflecting a mix of admiration. "Your mother mentioned you were set to become a schoolteacher." "That was the intention," she confirmed. "I was scheduled to begin at the schoolhouse in Willow Creek next month. But her voice faded as she contemplated the town now submerged. Towns can be rebuilt, Skyclaw reassured her. Or new ones emerge, and educators will always be in demand. The sun was dipping low when they finally spotted the settlement at Redemption Ridge. Numerous families had sought refuge on the plateau, constructing temporary tents and lean-tos. Smoke billowed from cooking fires, and children played among the makeshift shelters. A shout went up as they were noticed, and suddenly people were rushing toward them. Leading the way were Finn and Seraphina Hearthstone, their faces alight with joy and disbelief. "Isolde!" her mother cried, reaching up as Skyclaw assisted her in dismounting. "Oh, my dear, my precious girl." Her father enveloped them both in a hug, tears streaming freely down his rugged cheeks. "We feared we'd lost you for good." "Mr. Dunwin found me," Isolde explained, turning to her rescuer, who had dismounted and stood at a respectful distance. "He returned when no one else could." Finn Hearthstone stepped forward, gripping Skyclaw's hand firmly. "How can we ever repay you? You've brought our daughter back to us." Skyclaw shook his head. "No recompense is needed, sir. I'm just relieved I reached her in time." The Hearthstones insisted that Skyclaw join them for dinner. Modest though it was, beans, cornbread, and coffee shared around a small fire. Isolde's younger siblings bombarded him with questions about the rescue, which he answered patiently, though briefly. As night descended, families retreated to their shelters. Skyclaw prepared to depart, checking Thunder's saddle. "You're not staying?" Isolde asked, approaching him at the camp's edge. "Better to leave while there's still some moonlight," he replied. "I have duties awaiting me." "Will we see you again?" The question slipped out before she could ponder its appropriateness. Skyclaw's expression was indecipherable in the faint light. "Willow Creek is a small place, Miss Hearthstone. I expect our paths will intersect again." It wasn't a strong promise, but Isolde felt a peculiar disappointment as she watched him ride away, his figure gradually consumed by the darkness. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity as the flood survivors established a more permanent settlement on Redemption Ridge. Some, like the Hearthstones, were resolved to return to their land once the waters receded, while others chose to depart, seeking fresh starts in distant lands. Isolde dedicated herself to fortifying the community. She lent a hand in the kitchen, tended to the children while their parents scavenged the valley below, and even initiated spontaneous lessons for the school-age kids to preserve a semblance of normalcy. Throughout it all, she kept a vigilant eye on the trail, yearning for a sighting of a towering cowboy astride a dark steed. However, Skyclaw Dunwin did not make his way back to Redemption Ridge. After a month, the floodwaters had sufficiently retreated, allowing families to commence the rebuilding process. The Hearthstone homestead, like numerous others, had been reduced to ruins, but the land endured. Finn Hearthstone was resolute in his decision to forge ahead. "We'll construct it more robustly this time," he declared to his family, as they inspected the mud-caked remnants of their home, higher up the slope, beyond the river's grasp. While her family camped in a tent on their property, Isolde secured a temporary role as a boarder and assistant to Mrs. Stormreach, the widow who managed the general store in the fledgling settlement on Redemption Ridge. This arrangement enabled her to earn a modest income, while plans for reconstructing the school in Willow Creek were deliberated. It was during her second week at the store that the bell above the door chimed, and Skyclaw Dunwin entered. Isolde nearly fumbled the bolt of calico she was measuring for a customer. "Mr. Dunwin," she managed, her voice barely steady. "What an unexpected pleasure," he acknowledged with a polite nod, doffing his hat. Miss Hearthstone, it's good to see you in good health." After attending to her customer, Isolde approached Skyclaw, who was perusing a display of tools. Up close, she noticed that he appeared weary, with a fresh cut healing above his right eyebrow. "We've been wondering how you've been faring," she remarked. "My parents would be delighted to see you if you have the time to visit their camp." "That's very kind of them," Skyclaw replied. "As a matter of fact, I've been assisting in clearing debris from the valley. Your father hired me to recover what I could from your homestead." Isolde's eyes widened in surprise. "He didn't mention it to me. He asked me just yesterday. I found a few items that might be of value to your family." He gestured to his saddlebags. "I thought I'd deliver them to you personally." From the bag, Skyclaw carefully retrieved several items. Her mother's silver cutlery set, remarkably unscathed, a dryotype of her grandparents, and most precious of all, her mother's music box, its painted surface marred by mud but otherwise unharmed. "The music still plays," Skyclaw murmured as Isolde accepted the box with trembling hands. "I tested it myself." She opened the lid, and the delicate notes of Beautiful Dreamer filled the quiet store. Tears welled in her eyes. "This belonged to my grandmother," she whispered. "My mother believed it was lost forever." Skyclaw shifted uncomfortably under the weight of her gratitude. "Just doing the job I was paid for." "No," Isolde shook her head. "You surpassed your usual efforts." A fleeting glimpse of vulnerability flashed in his green eyes, swiftly concealed. "Allow me to take my leave, Miss Hearthstone. I must return to my tasks before the sun sets." Before Isolde could utter a word, he had donned his hat and was making his way to the door. Driven by impulse, Isolde called out to him. "Mr. Durnwind, there's an event scheduled for Saturday, a social gathering to boost morale and collect funds for reconstruction. Perhaps you might join us." Skyclaw's hand hesitated on the doorknob. For a moment, Isolde thought he would decline. "I'm not one for social events, Miss Hearthstone," he said deliberately, "but I'll think about it." With that, he departed, leaving Isolde gazing after him, the music box still playing its gentle tune in her hands. Saturday dawned bright and clear. The community had converted the central clearing of the settlement into a lively space, complete with tables laden with food, a designated area for dancing, and lanterns hung between the trees to illuminate the evening. Isolde donned her finest dress, a blue cotton garment that luckily had been packed in the wagon during their escape. With her hair styled in a simple yet elegant manner, she assured herself that her meticulous preparations had nothing to do with the chance of encountering Skyclaw Dunwin, but her eyes continually scanned the increasing crowd for his tall figure. The social was in full swing. Children engaged in games, adults conversed and enjoyed the first genuine celebration since the flood. When Isolde noticed him standing at the periphery of the gathering, he appeared different, almost unrecognizable at first. His dark hair was neatly trimmed, his face clean-shaven, and he wore a crisp white shirt under a black vest instead of his usual work attire. Their gazes met across the clearing, and Isolde felt her heart race. She navigated her way toward him, maneuvering through clusters of chatting neighbors. "You attended," she said softly upon reaching him. Skyclaw shifted his stance, appearing slightly ill at ease in his fine clothes. "I thought a change of scenery from mud and debris might be refreshing." "Well, I'm pleased you came." Isolde smiled. "Have you had a chance to eat? Mrs. Stormreach baked her renowned apple pie." Skyclaw allowed her to guide him to the food tables, where he filled a plate with fried chicken, beans, and cornbread. They sat at the edge of the gathering, observing as several men tuned fiddles and a banjo for dancing. "How is the rebuilding progressing?" Isolde inquired after they had eaten in comfortable silence. "It's slow but steady," Skyclaw responded. "Your father has selected an excellent site for the new house. Higher ground, better drainage. It should be completed before winter arrives." "And what about you? Will you remain in the area?" Skyclaw took a sip from his cup before responding. "For now, there's ample work for a man willing to do it." The music commenced a lively reel, prompting couples to form sets for dancing. Isolde watched, tapping her foot to the rhythm. "Would you like to dance, Miss Hearthstone?" The inquiry caught her so off guard that she fixed her gaze on Skyclaw for a moment before she could respond. "I'd be honored, Mr. Hayes." He extended his hand, and as she accepted it, Isolde felt a heat that had nothing to do with the warm night. Skyclaw guided her to the dance floor, positioning himself opposite her as the musicians began to play. To her astonishment, Skyclaw proved to be a skilled dancer, moving with the same effortless grace he displayed while riding. As they moved around each other, their hands briefly touching before separating, Isolde caught fleeting glimpses of a different man beneath his reserved facade, one who smiled more easily, whose green eyes held a spark she hadn't noticed before. They danced through 3 sets before pausing, both flushed and slightly out of breath. Skyclaw retrieved cups of lemonade, and they stepped away from the crowd to rest. "You're a man of surprises, Mr. Hayes," Isolde remarked, taking a sip of the refreshing drink. "I wouldn't have pegged you for a dancer." A faint smile touched the corners of his mouth. "My mother was adamant that her children learn. She believed it was a refined skill that would benefit us." "She was wise," Isolde agreed. "Though I suspect there are many aspects of you that would surprise me." Skyclaw's expression turned contemplative. "Not many, I'm afraid. What you observe is mostly what you receive, Miss Hearthstone." "I'm not so convinced of that," she murmured. "The man who rode through a storm to rescue a stranger, who searches through mud to recover a family's heirlooms, who dances as if he genuinely enjoys it. That man is worth getting to know better, I believe." Their gazes locked, and for a moment the hum of the gathering faded away. Skyclaw took a step closer, near enough that Isolde could see the gold flecks in his green eyes. "Isolde," he said, using her first name for the first time. "I'm Penny." The moment was interrupted by the arrival of Isolde's younger sister, Sarah. "Elysia is looking for you. She says it's time to serve the desserts." Reluctantly, Isolde nodded. "Tell her I'll be right there." She turned back to Skyclaw. "Will you wait? There's something I'd like to discuss with you." He nodded, and Isolde hurried to assist with the dessert table. But when she returned to their spot at the edge of the clearing 20 minutes later, Skyclaw Dunawind had vanished. August transitioned into September, and the rebuilding efforts continued. The new foster home took shape on the hillside, a more robust structure than the one that had been destroyed. Isolde split her time between aiding at the general store, supporting her family, and educating the children of Redemption Ridge in a temporary school under a large canvas tent. She encountered Skyclaw occasionally during this period, usually from a distance, as he delivered lumber or assisted in raising a roof beam. He would tip his hat courteously if their eyes met, but made no attempt to initiate a conversation. The bond they had shared at the socials seemed to have dissipated like morning fog under the summer sun. It was the first week of October, with the evening air growing crisp, that Isolde was left alone at the unfinished foster home. Her parents had taken the younger children to the general store to gather supplies, leaving Isolde to tidy and arrange the kitchen, which was almost complete. The rhythmic pounding of hooves caught her attention as she worked. Looking up, she saw Skyclaw descending from his horse, Thunder. He carried a wooden crate, which he gently placed on the porch before noticing Isolde observing him. "Miss Hearthstone," he greeted, tipping his hat. "I didn't anticipate finding anyone here." "My family is at the store," she replied, brushing her hands on her apron as she moved toward the door. "What brings you here, Mr. Dunwin?" Skyclaw nodded towards the crate. "Your father commissioned it specially from Denver. I thought I'd deliver it while the weather holds." "That's very thoughtful of you," Isolde said. An uncomfortable silence stretched between them, filled with unsaid words. Eventually, Skyclaw cleared his throat. "Well, I should be on my way. Please inform your father that the glass arrived safely." As he began to leave, Isolde found her voice. "Why did you depart from the social without a farewell?" Skyclaw paused, his back to her. For a long moment, he didn't move or speak. "It seemed best," he finally said, still not facing her. "Best for whom?" Isolde asked, encouraged by their solitude. Now Skyclaw turned to her, his expression carefully composed. "Miss Hearthstone, I'm not the sort of man who fits in at socials, dancing with respectable young ladies." "And what manner of man are you, then?" she inquired, stepping onto the porch. Skyclaw's jaw tightened. "The kind who has nothing to offer but hard labor and harsher memories." "The kind who's better off alone." "I don't believe that," Isolde said softly. "And I don't think you do either. Not truly." Something flickered in his eyes, a longing swiftly suppressed. "What I believe doesn't alter the facts," he said. "You come from a fine family and have received a good education. You'll be a school teacher, respected in the community. I'm a wanderer who has lingered in one place a bit too long, that's all." "Is that why you rescued me from the flood?" Isolde challenged, taking another step towards him. "Because you're just a drifter? Is that why you searched through the mud for my mother's music box? Why you attended the social, looking so handsome that it made my heart skip a beat?" Skyclaw's composed demeanor faltered slightly. "Isolde, I'm not seeking promises," she interjected. "I'm simply asking you to stop fleeing from whatever this is between us." They stood facing each other on the porch, the autumn breeze rustling the golden leaves of the cottonwood trees that bordered the property. Skyclaw's internal struggle was evident in the rigidity of his shoulders and the clenching of his jaw. "I should leave," he finally said, his voice hoarse with emotion. As he began to turn away again, Isolde did something entirely out of character for a young lady of her background. She extended her hand and grasped his arm, forcing him to turn back and face her. "Skyclaw Dunwind," she declared with resolve, "you braved a flood to rescue me. The very least you can do is be truthful with me now." His expression shifted, as if a dam had burst, releasing emotions he had long held back. "Honesty, you want? All right. You're constantly on my mind. Your face is the last thing I see when I close my eyes at night. Your laughter echoes in the rustling leaves. It frightens me because everyone I've ever cared for has been torn from me, and I'm not sure I could endure losing someone else." His words lingered in the air between them, unfiltered and genuine. Isolde's heart pounded as she processed their weight. "I can't guarantee you won't lose me one day," she murmured. "No one can make that promise, but I can assure you that right now, in this instant, I'm here, and I share your feelings." Skyclaw's resolve seemed to dissolve. With a tender hesitation, he lifted a rough hand to her cheek, his touch as light as a feather. "Isolde Hearthstone," he whispered, "you deserve more than a man like me." I deserve a man who sees me for who I am, she countered, leaning slightly into his touch. Someone who respects me enough to be honest about his feelings, who's brave enough to pursue happiness, even knowing it might not last forever. The distance between them seemed to vanish on its own. Skyclaw's eyes searched hers, seeking approval for what they both desired. Isolde gave the faintest nod, and then his lips met hers, hesitant at first, then with growing assurance as she reciprocated. It was Isolde's first kiss, and it was everything the romance novels had promised and more. A warmth that spread from her lips to her toes, a dizzying sense of rightness, a feeling of returning home after a long journey. When they finally pulled away, Skyclaw kept his forehead pressed to hers, his breath uneven. I don't know where this will take us, he confessed, but I'd like to find out, if you're willing. Isolde smiled, her heart swelling with a joy she had never known. I'm willing. The sound of an approaching wagon interrupted the moment. Skyclaw stepped back respectfully as the Foster family returned home, though the look he shared with Isolde hinted at more moments to come. That evening, Skyclaw Dunawin joined the Hearthstone family for supper at their invitation. Seated across from Isolde at the makeshift table, he occasionally caught her eye, a private smile passing between them. After the meal, he formally asked Finn Hearthstone for permission to court his daughter, a request that was granted with a knowing smile and a firm handshake. As the days grew shorter and the nights colder, Skyclaw became a frequent visitor at the Foster home. He lent a hand during the final phases of building, joining the family for meals, and once the work was finished, he would spend evenings with Isolde on the porch, their conversations stretching long into the night. They exchanged their life stories, Skyclaw recounting his struggles after losing his family, his aspirations of one day owning a ranch, and Isolde sharing her love for teaching, her enthusiasm for books, and her desire to impact the lives of frontier children. They found common ground in values like honesty, hard work, and loyalty, and appreciated the differences that made their talks so captivating. By November, the new Foster home stood complete, a robust two-story building designed to endure any challenges nature might present. The community came together for a housewarming celebration, filling the newly finished barn with music, food, and dancing. As they moved together in a slow waltz, Isolde couldn't help but observe how much Skyclaw had changed from the somber cowboy who had saved her months earlier. His smiles came more naturally now, his laughter more often, and the shadow that had once darkened his eyes had mostly vanished. "What's on your mind?" he inquired, his hand gently resting on her back. "I barely recognize you sometimes," she admitted. "You seem lighter." Skyclaw's smile was tender, just for her. "I feel lighter. You've given me something I thought I'd never have again, Isolde." "And what's that?" she asked. "Hope," he replied softly. "A reason to build something permanent, instead of just moving on." His words filled her with a warmth that surpassed any fire. As winter enveloped the valley, their bond grew stronger. Skyclaw had secured a foreman position at the nearby Henderson Ranch, a stable job that allowed him to save money while staying close to Redemption Ridge. Christmas brought another gathering, this time in the newly rebuilt church. Pine boughs and red ribbons adorned the humble space, and candles flickered in the windows. After the service, as families exchanged simple gifts and shared treats, Skyclaw led Isolde outside into the quiet, cold night. Snowflakes drifted gently from the starry sky, settling in Isolde's hair like tiny jewels. Skyclaw took both her hands in his expression serious despite the season's joy. "I have something for you," he said, retrieving a small package wrapped in brown paper from his pocket. Isolde carefully unwrapped it to reveal a delicate silver locket, similar to the one she had rescued from the flood, but new, its surface adorned with intricate flowers. "It's beautiful," she whispered, opening it to find it empty inside. "Thank you, Skyclaw," she thought. He paused, unusually nervous. "I imagined that one day it might hold a picture of us, of our family, if you'll have me." Isolde's heart raced as she understood his meaning. Skyclaw took a deep breath, then knelt in the fresh snow before her, still holding her hands. "Skyclaw Dunwind, I returned for you through a deluge, and I vow to come back for you every day for the rest of my life, if you agree to be my wife." Joy surged within her like a fountain. "Yes," she replied instantly, tears of joy streaming down her face. "Yes, I will be your wife, Skyclaw." He stood and embraced her, kissing her with a gentleness that contrasted with his robust build. Above them the stars bore witness to their pledge, and the snowfall persisted, concealing the flood's wounds with a spotless layer of white, nature's way of providing a new beginning. Their union was solemnized in April 1874, when wildflowers blanketed the hills and fresh leaves glowed with the vibrant green of new starts. The event transpired in the reconstructed church, with the entire community present. Isolde adorned a gown of ivory satin, meticulously crafted by her mother and sisters in secret throughout the winter, and Skyclaw appeared strikingly handsome in a new suit, his green eyes fixed on his bride as they exchanged their vows. The subsequent festivities lasted deep into the night, filled with music, dancing, and an abundance of food, more than the small settlement had enjoyed since before the flood. As the celebration carried on, the newlyweds stole away, riding double on Thunder, to the modest cabin Skyclaw had constructed on a parcel of land he had acquired at the foot of Redemption Ridge. It was unassuming yet sturdy, featuring a stone hearth, 2 chambers, and a covered porch that offered a panoramic view of the valley. Skyclaw had furnished it with simplicity and care, including a bed with a handcrafted quilt, a rocking chair by the fire, shelves for Isolde's books, and a small table for their shared meals. "Welcome home, Mrs. Dunwin," Skyclaw murmured as he carried her over the threshold. Later, as they lay together in the tranquility of their first night as husband and wife, the connection they shared was both fervent and gentle, a physical manifestation of the profound bond that had developed between them since that tempestuous night when Skyclaw had materialized like a protective spirit in the flood. "I never imagined I'd discover this," Skyclaw whispered, his fingers delicately tracing patterns on Isolde's bare shoulder. "A home? Someone to share it with?" Isolde propped herself up on one elbow, gazing down at her husband's face in the moonlight that filtered through the curtains. "When the flood struck, I believed I had lost everything, but it led me to you, or you to me." Skyclaw smiled, tucking a strand of auburn hair behind her ear. "Regardless, I am grateful for it, even though you had to ride through a raging river to save a stubborn girl who was left behind," she teased. "Especially for that," he responded, drawing her close. "I would do it again without a moment's hesitation." Spring transitioned into summer, and their life together settled into agreeable routines. Skyclaw continued his role as foreman at the Henderson Ranch, while Isolde taught at the newly rebuilt schoolhouse in the revitalized town of Willow Creek. As the sun dipped below the horizon, they would settle on their porch, watching the sky blush with gold and crimson, sharing tales of their day and visions of tomorrow. These aspirations started to materialize as Skyclaw's diligence and prudent savings enabled them to acquire more land bordering their existing property. By the time their first anniversary rolled around, they had laid the groundwork for a modest ranch, complete with a handful of cattle, a pair of milk cows, a flock of chickens, and a thriving vegetable garden that Isolde nurtured with tender devotion. One evening, after a day filled with toil, Skyclaw spoke as they sat on the porch, his arm draped around Isolde's shoulders. "I've been pondering an idea," he said. "What if we expanded the cabin, added a few more rooms?" Isolde's face lit up with a smile, and she guided his free hand to her belly, which had just begun to hint at a slight swell. "I've been thinking the same thing," she replied. "We might need the extra space before long." Skyclaw's eyes widened in realization. "Are you telling me what I think you're telling me?" he asked. Isolde nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "By November, there will be 3 of us." The sheer joy that washed over Skyclaw's face was a sight Isolde knew she would cherish forever. He enveloped her in his arms, his touch as gentle as if she were a delicate treasure. "A baby," he murmured into her hair. "Our baby." The ensuing months were a flurry of activity. They added 2 rooms to the cabin. Skyclaw crafted a cradle during his evenings, and Isolde sewed tiny garments by lamplight after her teaching duties. On a frigid, clear night in late November, with the world outside cloaked in snow, Isolde brought their daughter into the world. Skyclaw wore a path in the main room's floor, his anxiety palpable, as the midwife tended to his wife. And when the newborn's cry finally echoed through the night, he felt his heart swell with love. "Come meet your daughter," the midwife invited, and Skyclaw entered the bedroom, his steps unsteady. Isolde looked weary yet radiant, cradling a small bundle swaddled in a soft blanket. She gazed up at her husband, tears of joy streaking her cheeks. "She has your eyes," Isolde whispered as Skyclaw perched carefully on the edge of the bed. And indeed, when the infant's eyes fluttered open briefly, they were the same vivid green as her father's. Skyclaw extended a trembling finger, which the baby instinctively grasped, her tiny hand a marvel of perfection. "What name shall we give her?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. Isolde had contemplated names for months, but in that moment only one felt right. "Lyra," she said softly, "after your sister, Lyra Starvale Dunwind." Skyclaw's eyes welled up with tears. "Lyra Starvale," he repeated, the name a blessing on his lips. "It's perfect. She's perfect." As winter's grip tightened over the land, the Dunwind family discovered a new cadence to their days and nights. Skyclaw shouldered more of the household responsibilities, giving Isolde the chance to rest and care for their daughter. He frequently occupied the rocking chair by the hearth, cradling little Lyra close to his heart, humming the gentle lullabies his own mother had once sung to him. Isolde would observe them together, her heart swelling with so much love that it felt like it might burst. Occasionally, in moments of quiet reflection, she would recall the flood that had altered the trajectory of her life, the sheer panic of being abandoned, the astonishing arrival of Skyclaw on horseback, and the journey to safer ground that had ultimately led her to this life, richer than she could have ever envisioned. The arrival of spring brought renewal to the land and new opportunities for the family. Skyclaw's meticulous oversight of their modest herd had borne fruit, enabling them to employ 2 additional hands to assist with the growing ranch. Isolde returned to teaching, though on a reduced schedule that allowed her to bring Lyra with her to the schoolhouse a few days each week. The subsequent years brought a mix of happiness and obstacles. A severe drought in the summer of '76 pushed their endurance to the limit. However, Skyclaw's foresight in constructing water storage systems preserved their cattle, while others in the area lost their herds. A second child, a son they named Cormac Finn in honor of both their fathers, was born in the winter of '77, completing their family in a way that felt destined. By the time Lyra was 5 and Cormac was 2, the Dunwind Ranch had grown into one of the most thriving in the county. The original cabin had been transformed into a cozy home, with a stone foundation, glass windows, and a spacious porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Skyclaw, once a lone wanderer, had become a respected rancher, known for his fair practices and quiet generosity to those in need. Isolde continued her teaching, having earned a reputation as an educator who could ignite a passion for learning even in the most reluctant students. When the town council proposed constructing a larger school to accommodate the expanding population, they unanimously decided to name it the Foster Hayes Academy, in recognition of her contributions to the community. On the 10th anniversary of the flood that had brought them together, Skyclaw and Isolde ventured out alone to the place where their journey had commenced. The old Hearthstone homestead was long gone, with no remnants left of the house that had nearly become Isolde's grave. The river flowed calmly within its banks, offering no indication of its destructive power. They dismounted, laying out a blanket on the grassy bank for a simple picnic. The day was warm, the sky a clear blue that mirrored in the water below. "It's hard to fathom that it's been 10 years, Isolde remarked, gazing at the serene landscape. "Sometimes it feels like it was just yesterday," Skyclaw agreed, his hand finding hers on the blanket. "I still vividly recall how you appeared when I found you in that window, terrified yet resolute. I knew in that moment that you were someone extraordinary." Isolde smiled, resting against his shoulder. "And I remember thinking that you were either my savior or a figment of my imagination. Regardless, I was prepared to take the leap. It's fortunate I found you." Skyclaw laughed, wrapping his arm around her. "You've been finding me ever since," she whispered in return. They sat quietly together for a time, observing the river's steady flow, each engrossed in thoughts of the years they had spent together. "Have you ever pondered," Isolde inquired after a while, "what might have transpired if the flood had never occurred?" "If I hadn't been abandoned," Skyclaw reflected on her question thoughtfully, "I hope we would have crossed paths eventually. Perhaps at a community gathering or in town. But it might have taken me longer to gather the nerve to approach you." The dedicated educator and the lone cowboy, Isolde reflected. "It does seem improbable on paper, but not out of reach," Skyclaw remarked. "Not when fate intervenes." As the sun dipped lower, painting the valley with elongated shadows, they gathered their picnic supplies and readied themselves to head back. Their children, Lyra and Cormac, were being looked after by Isolde's younger sister at their home. Before mounting their horses, Skyclaw drew Isolde close, kissing her with the same gentleness he had shown on their wedding day. "Thank you," he said as they separated. "For what?" she asked, her hands resting on his chest. "For betting on a man who doubted he deserved joy for our children. For making every day since the flood worthwhile." Isolde's eyes glistened with emotion. "The flood brought us together, but it's love that has kept us united." "Love and choice, every single day," Skyclaw nodded, grasping the depth of her words. "And I choose you, Isolde Dunewind, today and forever." They rode home together as the setting sun bathed the landscape in a warm, golden glow. Behind them, the river flowed on, a natural force that had once posed a threat, but had ultimately led to the creation of a family, a home, and a love strong enough to endure any future storms. At the top of Redemption Ridge they halted, gazing down at the expansive ranch that had grown from a modest cabin into a prosperous endeavor. Smoke curled from the chimney, and the laughter of their children echoed on the evening breeze as they played in the yard under their aunt's vigilant eye. "Higher ground," Isolde murmured, repeating the phrase that had become a personal mantra for them, a reminder of their journey and how far they had come. Skyclaw reached out to take her hand, his green eyes mirroring the sunset's golden light. "Higher ground," he agreed. And so, they descended the slope toward home, toward their children, toward the future. They continued to forge a future, born from the moment. A resolute cowboy had ventured back alone through a raging flood to rescue a girl left behind, and in doing so, had saved himself as well. If this story touched you, give it a like, and tell us in the comments, what would you have done if you were in their shoes? Subscribe to Frontier Stories and join us as we continue to tell stories of hope, resilience, and the beautiful, messy truth of Wild West.